The deal was worth more than the GDP of a small nation. $10 billion waiting on the tip of a Mont Blanc pen. In the rarefied air of New York City's most powerful boardrooms, Julian Croft was known as the Architect, a man who built empires not of steel and glass, but of assets and influence. He was 34, with eyes the color of a winter sky, and a reputation forged in the fires of corporate warfare. Everyone at the table in the celestial dining room of l'Apogée saw him as the predator, the inheritor of a dynasty who had never known failure. But tonight, under the soft glow of a crystal chandelier, he was the lamb, being led to a slaughter so elegant, so perfectly orchestrated, he wouldn't even feel the knife. He was moments from signing away his legacy, flanked by lawyers whose smiles were as sharp and empty as their billable hours. He couldn't see the flaw in the foundation, the fatal crack in the blueprint. But the girl, the one who moved like a phantom refilling his Pellegrino, she saw it. And when she spoke, the tectonic plates of Manhattan's elite shifted beneath their feet. This is the story of how a waitress with ghosts in her eyes saved an empire, and how the man who had everything learned that the most valuable structures are not built on land, but on truth. The rain fell in silver sheets against the panoramic windows of l'Apogée, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a whisper of a reputation. Inside, the atmosphere was a carefully curated symphony of hushed tones, the scent of seared scallops, and the low hum of immense power. Clara Evans, 23, smoothed the front of her starched black apron, her name tag a tiny, insignificant detail on a uniform designed for invisibility. Her hands, usually steady from years of balancing trays, trembled slightly. Not from nerves, but from a bone-deep weariness that had settled in weeks ago. 2 jobs, 6 days a week, to keep a small queen's apartment, and a promise to a ghost. To the patrons of l'Apogée, she was part of the décor, a silent automaton programmed to pour, clear, and vanish. She had cultivated this non-existence. Invisibility was a shield. It meant no one looked too closely at the girl with the haunted, intelligent eyes, or wondered why someone who could dissect a zoning variance in her head was clearing away half-eaten portions of Dover sole for a living. "Table 7 is yours, Evans," Mr. Dubois, the maître d', murmured as he glided past, his face a mask of professional disdain. "Do not, under any circumstances, be a distraction. Mr. Croft is closing the Finch Tower acquisition." Clara's stomach twisted into a cold knot. Julian Croft, the son of the legendary, ruthless Augustus Croft. The younger Croft was said to be different, more visionary, less of a brute, but the name still carried the weight of a wrecking ball. Tonight, he was finalizing the deal of the year, purchasing the last, most coveted piece of undeveloped land in Midtown from his family's oldest rival, Alistair Finch. Clara picked up the heavy silver water pitcher, its surface cool against her clammy hands, and approached the table. 4 men sat around it. 3 were older, their suits exuding the quiet confidence of generational wealth. The 4th was Julian Croft. He sat silhouetted against the glittering skyline, a king in his court. He wasn't smiling. He was listening intently to the man opposite him, Alistair Finch. "The terms are ironclad, Julian," Finch was saying, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that didn't quite conceal the predatory gleam in his eyes. "A simple land transfer. My legacy for your liquidity. We sign tonight. The press release goes out at dawn. Clean. Simple." "Nothing is ever simple with you, Alistair," Julian replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed to absorb the ambient noise. "My team has reviewed the primary contract. It seems straightforward enough." "Because it is," Finch insisted, gesturing to a thick, leather-bound document in the center of the table. Just a standard purchase agreement. You get the last great canvas in this city. I get to retire and sail my yacht into the sunset. Everyone wins. Clara moved with practiced silence, a ghost at the edge of their vision. She filled Finch's glass first, then those of his two lawyers, men whose faces were flushed with a mixture of expensive wine and nervous excitement. Finally, she came to Julian's right. As she leaned forward, her gaze fell upon the open contract. It wasn't the main body of the text that caught her eye, but a supplementary folio tucked beside it, almost an afterthought. It was labeled Appendix D, Geological Survey and Historical Easement Filings. On top of the stack of dry, technical papers was a folded blueprint, a site plan. She tried to pull her eyes away. It was not her world. She was a waitress, a nobody. But her mind, a repository of her father's lessons, a library of his passions, refused to let go. Her father, Daniel Evans, had been one of the city's most brilliant structural architects, a man who believed buildings had souls, and that integrity was measured in steel and concrete, not dollars. A man who had lost everything, his reputation, his firm, his life, when a downtown project, a Croft tower, had suffered a catastrophic structural failure. The official story was faulty design, Daniel Evans's fault. Clara knew it was a lie. The lines on the blueprint weren't just lines to her. They were a language she had learned at her father's knee. A thin, red-dotted line snaked across the property, labeled San Andreas Minor Fault Trace, inactive. Beside it, a shaded gray area was marked 19128 Municipal Water Main Easement, protected. Separately, they were minor issues, footnotes in a city built on layers of forgotten history and geology. But together, Clara froze. The water pitcher tilted in her hand, a single drop of condensation falling onto the polished mahogany. The fault line, while inactive, would trigger a mandatory deep piling foundation requirement under City Code 18B. But the historical water main easement expressly forbade any subsurface excavation deeper than 20 feet within its 50-foot boundary. The two restrictions overlapped directly in the center of the property, the exact spot where the load-bearing core of any major skyscraper would have to be sunk. You couldn't build on it. Not a skyscraper, not the gleaming 80-story monument to his legacy that Julian Croft had publicly announced. The land was worthless for his purpose. It was a $10 billion pit. "Miss," Julian Croft's voice sliced through her thoughts. He wasn't looking at the contract. He was looking directly at her. His gaze was sharp, analytical, and profoundly irritated. "The water," he said, his tone clipped. Clara snapped back to reality, her heart hammering against her ribs. "My apologies, sir." She filled his glass, her hand shaking so violently she nearly spilled it. She had to walk away. Say nothing. This job was her lifeline. Her mother's long-term care facility wasn't cheap. Speaking up meant getting fired at best. At worst, it meant drawing the attention of men who crushed people like her father for sport. Alistair Finch slid a heavy, gold-plated pen across the table. "The signature line awaits, Julian. Let's make history." Julian picked up the pen. He uncapped it, the sound a soft, final click. The nib hovered, a fraction of an inch from the paper. "Walk away, Clara. Just walk away." But then she saw it. The faintest, most fleeting smirk on Alistair Finch's face. It was the look of a chess master who has just cornered the king, a look of absolute, triumphant deceit. The same look she remembered seeing on the face of one of Augustus Croft's executives the day her father was ruined. She couldn't do it. She couldn't watch another good man be destroyed by a lie buried in the details. "Excuse me," Clara said. The words were a bare whisper, yet in the high-stakes tension of the moment, they cracked like a whip. Julian's hand stilled. The pen touched the paper, leaving a small black dot like a period on a death sentence. But he did not sign. He turned his head, slowly, his winter sky eyes fixing on her. What was that? Mr. Dubois was already materializing from the shadows, his face ashen. "Mr. Croft, my sincerest apologies. She is new. She will be dealt with immediately." "Quiet," Julian commanded, his voice soft but absolute. He never took his eyes off Clara. "You said something." Clara clutched the water pitcher to her chest like a shield. Her entire future was balanced on the head of a pin. I said, "Excuse me, sir," she stammered. "And?" Julian prompted, his expression unreadable, a dangerous calm. She took a breath, drawing on a reservoir of her father's righteous anger. She glanced at the blueprint, then at Alistair Finch, whose face had become a rigid mask of fury. "That appendix," she said, her voice finding its strength. She pointed a trembling finger at the folio. "The geological survey and the easement filing. That clause, it's not a clause, it's a foundation trap." The silence that descended was so complete, Clara could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. Alistair Finch broke it with a bark of incredulous laughter. "A foundation trap? Julian, are you seriously listening to legal analysis from the hired help? This is pathetic. Dubois, get her out of my sight." Mr. Dubois grabbed Clara's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "You're fired, Evans. Out, now." "Let her go." Julian's voice was unchanged in volume, but it carried the authority of a judge's gavel. He capped the pen and placed it deliberately on the table. He swiveled his chair to face Clara fully, a king granting an audience to a peasant. "Explain." Clara wrenched her arm free. The fear was still there, a cold snake in her gut. But something else was rising to meet it. The architect's daughter. The girl who knew that the truth was in the details. "Page 3 of the survey," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It notes the San Andreas minor trace. City Code 18B requires seismic retrofitting with 40-foot pilings for any structure over 10 stories. Page 7 of the easement filings, the 1908 municipal main, prohibits excavation below 20 feet. The two zones overlap. You can't build deep enough to support a skyscraper, and you can't build anything smaller without violating the height covenants Finch himself put on the surrounding properties. The land is a paradox. You can't build up and you can't build down. He's selling you a $10 billion hole in the ground." Alistair Finch's face had gone from red to a pasty white. "This is insane. She's making it up. She can't possibly know that." "Read it, Mr. Croft," Clara urged, her eyes pleading with him. "The details are all there. He's not selling you a canvas. He's selling you a cage." Julian stared at her for a long, unnerving moment. Then he reached over and pulled the folio towards him. He bypassed the legalese of the contract and opened Appendix D. He was a builder's son. He knew how to read a site plan. He traced the red-dotted line with his finger, then the shaded grey area. He stared at the point where they intersected. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the muscles in his jaw tightened. The temperature at the table seemed to plummet. He looked up, and the cool, analytical expression was gone. In its place was something colder, something predatory that he had inherited from his father, after all. "Alistair," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. "What is the current tensile strength rating of the 1908 water main?" Finch began to sweat. "Aye, that's a technical detail for the engineers. Julian, listen to me. This girl is nobody." "It's cast iron," Julian continued, his eyes scanning the document now that he knew what to look for. "Which means it's brittle. Any deep core drilling within 100 feet would risk catastrophic failure, flooding the subway lines it runs parallel to. She's right. This isn't an acquisition. It's sabotage. You were going to let me sink my entire legacy project into a geological sinkhole and laugh all the way to the bank. Julian closed the folder with a soft, final thud. He looked at Clara, but this time he truly saw her. He saw the worn-out shoes, the fraying collar of her uniform, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the fierce, unyielding intelligence that burned through it all. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm just the waitress," Clara whispered. Julian turned back to Finch. "Get out." "Now, Julian, let's not be hasty." "Get out," Julian repeated, and the menace in his voice made Finch physically recoil. "And tell your lawyers that I will be filing a grievance with the bar for professional malpractice and malicious fraud. You won't just lose this deal, you'll lose your license." Alistair Finch shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. He glared at Clara, his face contorted with a venomous hatred. "You little fool," he hissed. "You have no idea the war you just started." He stormed away, his legal team scurrying in his wake like hyenas abandoning a failed hunt. The restaurant was deathly quiet. Every eye was on their table. Julian Croft picked up his wine glass. He took a slow, deliberate sip. He looked at Mr. Dubois, who was frozen in a state of pure terror. "She's gone, Mr. Croft, I assure you. She will never work in this city again," Dubois stammered. "If you fire her," Julian said calmly, "I will buy this building, and my first act as owner will be to personally escort you out of the front door. Then I will turn this restaurant into a homeless shelter. Am I clear?" Dubois' mouth worked, but no sound came out. He just nodded, a pathetic, jerky motion. Julian gestured to the chair Finch had just vacated. "Sit," he said to Clara. "Sir, I have to clear my tables." "Sit down," he repeated, a hint of steel entering his tone. "Please." Clara hesitated, then perched gingerly on the edge of the plush velvet chair. She felt like an alien who had just landed on a hostile planet. "You're not a waitress," Julian stated. It wasn't a question. Waitresses don't memorize the New York City building code. They don't spot fatal flaws in geological surveys from 3 feet away, upside down. I pay attention to details," Clara said weakly. "Don't lie to me," Julian said, his eyes narrowing. "You just saved me from the single most humiliating and financially catastrophic event of my life. The very least you can offer me in return is your name." "It's Clara," she said. "Clara Evans." Julian's brow furrowed. He tilted his head, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Evans? Why is that name familiar?" Clara's blood ran cold. He couldn't make the connection. "Not now, not here." "It's a common name," she said quickly. "Mr. Croft, I appreciate the gesture, but I really should get back to work. I need this job." Julian studied her, seeing the desperation she was trying so desperately to conceal. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and produced a slim, black titanium business card. He slid it across the table. "Report to my office tomorrow, 9 a.m., he commanded. "I can't. I have the morning shift at a diner in Queens." "Not anymore," Julian said. "You're working for me now." "Doing what?" "My entire legal department, a team of the most expensive lawyers in this city, missed that trap," Julian said, his voice laced with contempt. "You saw it while pouring water. You're going to find out what else they've missed." "I don't have a degree," Clara blurted out. "I dropped out of college." "I don't care about pieces of paper," Julian said, rising from his chair. He buttoned his jacket, his movements precise and controlled. I care about one thing, loyalty. And you, Clara Evans, just showed me yours, whether you meant to or not." He paused, looking down at her. 9 a.m. Don't be late." He turned and walked away, leaving Clara alone at the table, a $10 billion secret hanging in the air, and a business card in her hand that felt heavier than a block of solid gold. The next morning, the lobby of Croft Tower was a monument to power, a cavern of Italian marble and polished steel that made people instinctively lower their voices. Clara stood in the center of the atrium, wearing the only professional outfit she owned, a simple black dress and a cardigan she'd bought at a thrift store. It was clean and neat, but next to the bespoke suits striding past, she felt like a sparrow in an eyrie of eagles. She gave her name to the security guard, a man built like a refrigerator, and was surprised when he nodded respectfully. "Ms. Evans, Mr. Croft is expecting you. Penthouse level." The private elevator ascended with a silent, stomach-lurching speed. She gripped her worn leather purse, her mind a whirlwind of doubt. This was a mistake. She should be slinging hash at the diner, hiding in plain sight. Augustus Croft's company had destroyed her father. Now she was willingly walking into the heart of the beast, invited by the sun. If anyone discovered who she really was, the daughter of the disgraced architect Daniel Evans, she'd be crushed. The elevator doors opened directly into a sprawling office that seemed to float above the city. One wall was a solid pane of glass, offering a god's-eye view of Manhattan. Julian Croft stood in front of it, hands in his pockets, staring down at the city he was trying to conquer. He turned as she entered. He'd replaced his tuxedo with a sharp grey suit and a crisp white shirt, no tie. He looked younger, but no less intimidating. "You came," he said. It wasn't a greeting, but an observation. "You made it sound like I didn't have a choice." A faint smile touched his lips. "You always have a choice. You made one last night. It had consequences. This is one of them." He gestured to a leather chair opposite his massive oak desk. "Sit." Clara sat, perching on the edge. The chair probably cost more than her car. "I spent the last 12 hours with my team," Julian began, walking over to his desk, but not sitting. He leaned against it, crossing his arms. "We confirmed everything you said. The trap was even more elegant than you described. Finch had also bought up air rights from 3 adjacent buildings, boxing the property in. It was a masterpiece of corporate sabotage. He wasn't just trying to make a profit. He wanted to publicly humiliate me, to prove Augustus Croft's son didn't have the stomach for this city." "So the deal is off," Clara said. "The deal is off," he confirmed. "And Alistair Finch is now the subject of a federal fraud investigation, which I initiated at 3 a.m. However, he's not going down without a fight. He's already leaked a story to the Wall Street Journal that Croft Enterprises is financially unstable, that we backed out due to a liquidity crisis. Our stock is down 7% in pre-market trading." He pushed off the desk and began to pace. "This is a war of perception, Miss Evans. Finch attacked my competence. I need to change the narrative immediately." He stopped in front of her, his gaze intense. "Which brings me to you." "Me? I'm nobody. I served you water." "You are the story," he countered. "The brilliant, observant waitress who saw what a dozen Ivy League lawyers missed. The humble hero who saved the scion of Croft Enterprises from ruin. It's a fairy tale, and right now I need a fairy tale more than I need another banker." He returned to his desk and slid a thick document toward her. It wasn't an employment contract. It was a non-disclosure agreement attached to a consulting offer. "I want to hire you," he said. "Officially. As a special consultant to my office. Your job will be to review all major contracts and proposals before they get to me. You will be my failsafe. Your eye for detail is anomalous. I want to aim it at my company and see what you find." The salary offered in the contract made Clara's head spin. It was more money than her father had made in his best year. It was enough to move her mother to the best care facility in the state, to pay off every debt, to finally breathe. But it came with a price. It meant working for the company that bore the name of her family's destroyer. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You could just pay me a finder's fee, and I'd disappear." "Why bring me inside?" Julian sat down, and for the first time, the corporate armor seemed to crack. She saw a flicker of something weary, something almost vulnerable in his eyes. "My father, Augustus, built this company by being a shark. He trusted no one. He believed everyone was a potential enemy. I've tried to run it differently, on trust, on collaboration. Last night proved that my way might be naive. You don't trust me, and you have no reason to. You have no existing loyalties in this building. You're an outsider. Right now, an outsider with a brilliant eye is the only person I can trust." Clara looked down at the contract. Her heart was at war with her head. Her father's ghost screamed at her to run, to not make a deal with the devil's son. But the pragmatist, the tired young woman who watched her mother fade a little more each day, saw a lifeline. More than that, she saw an opportunity. "I have a condition," she said, surprising herself with her own audacity. Julian raised an eyebrow. "I'm offering you a small fortune and a corner office. You're in a position to make demands." "You said you need an outsider to find what's wrong with your company," Clara said, meeting his gaze. "To do that, I need access. Unrestricted access." "Access to what? The executive washroom?" "To the archives," she said, her voice dropping. "The physical archives, all of them, including all project files from the last 20 years. No redactions. No questions asked." She was looking for the truth about the downtown Croft Tower collapse, the proof that her father was innocent. It had to be buried somewhere in those files. This was her one chance to find it. Julian studied her, his expression turning analytical again. He was trying to solve the puzzle of her. Why the archives? What was she looking for? He didn't know her connection to Daniel Evans, but he could sense the hidden agenda. He could see the hunger for something more than money in her eyes. Most men would have refused. It was too much of a risk. But Julian Croft was his father's son in one crucial way. He was a gambler, and he had a feeling that betting on Clara Evans was the shrewdest wager he'd ever make. "You're a very interesting woman, Clara Evans," he said slowly. He extended a hand across the desk. "You have a deal. Welcome to Croft Enterprises." Clara took his hand. His grip was firm and warm. As their palms met, a strange current passed between them, a silent acknowledgement that they were two people, bound by secrets, stepping into a storm together. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. Clara was given a small, Spartan office next to Julian's, a space that still felt borrowed. The story of the Billionaire and the Waitress was a media sensation, just as Julian had predicted. It completely overshadowed Finch's smear campaign, turning a story of corporate failure into one of serendipitous triumph. Clara was hounded by reporters, an experience she found utterly terrifying. Julian shielded her from the worst of it. He became her unlikely protector, teaching her how to navigate the treacherous currents of her new world. He was a demanding boss, impatient, exacting, and allergic to incompetence. But he was also fair. When Clara, reviewing a proposed merger with a tech firm, found a series of shell corporations hiding massive debt, He didn't just kill the deal, he publicly credited her with the find in a board meeting, silencing the whispers that she was just his flavor of the month. The board was another matter. It was filled with men who had served under his father, old dinosaurs who saw Julian's collaborative style as weakness and Clara's presence as an absurdity. The most hostile among them was Walter Sterling, his father's oldest friend and the company's CFO, a man with kind eyes and a grandfatherly demeanor who treated Clara with a condescending paternalism that set her teeth on edge. "My dear, you have a natural intuition. It's charming," he'd say, patting her hand after she pointed out a flaw in his financial projections. "But leave the numbers to the professionals." Clara knew Walter was underestimating her, and she used it. While the world saw her as Julian's pet project, she spent her nights in the place she truly cared about: the archives. The Croft archives were housed in a climate-controlled sub-basement, a silent library of corporate history. Miles of shelves held thousands of document boxes. It was a mausoleum of secrets, and Clara was determined to find her father's ghost. She started with the files for the downtown Croft Tower, Project Cerberus. Box after box was filled with purchase orders, inspection reports, and memos. The official narrative was all there. Change orders for cheaper steel composites, signed by her father. Flawed foundation calculations under his letterhead. It was a perfectly constructed case. Too perfect. Late one night, surrounded by stacks of yellowing paper, she found it. A discrepancy. A series of invoices for steel girders from a supplier, Sterling Metals, was dated a week after the official inspection report that cleared them for installation. It was impossible. You couldn't inspect something that hadn't arrived yet. Her heart pounded. Sterling Metals. The CFO, Walter Sterling, had owned a steel company before joining Croft Enterprises full-time. She started digging into Walter's history. As she cross-referenced old shipping manifests with Walter's personal financial disclosures from that year, a horrifying picture began to emerge. Walter's company had been on the verge of bankruptcy. The Croft Tower contract had saved him. He had supplied substandard, cheaper steel, and colluded with someone to forge the inspection reports and her father's signatures. He had sacrificed her father's reputation and the lives of the people endangered by the faulty building to save himself. "Find what you're looking for," Clara gasped, spinning around so fast she knocked a box of files to the floor. Julian stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie loosened. He often worked as late as she did. I was just organizing," she lied, her body shielding the documents spread across the table. He walked into the room, his eyes sweeping over the chaos of paper. He didn't press her. Instead, he handed her a coffee. "You've been down here every night for a month, Clara. You're not organizing, you're excavating." He sat on the edge of the table, the gesture casual, yet it brought him uncomfortably close. "Whatever it is, I hope you find it." "Why?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Why let me dig through your family's dirty laundry?" He looked at the name Project Cerberus on one of the chill of the stone terrace seeped through the thin silk of Clara's gown, a cold reality against the borrowed fantasy she wore. Walter Sterling's words lingered in the air like poison gas, invisible but suffocating. "I will bury you in it." He hadn't just threatened her. He had threatened the ghost she had spent her entire adult life trying to protect. He had taken the fragile, sacred memory of her father and turned it into a hostage. She stared out at the city, a tapestry of indifferent lights. For years she had looked at those buildings and seen her father's legacy, his passion, his stolen genius. Now, all she could see was a graveyard of reputations, and Walter Sterling held the shovel. Rage, cold and sharp, warred with a despair so profound it felt like drowning. He had checkmated her. To save Julian, to achieve justice, she had to sacrifice her father. To save her father, she had to let a monster continue to feast on the empire Julian was trying to build. It was a perfect, elegant trap, far more insidious than the one laid for Julian in Appendix D. Footsteps echoed behind her. She didn't need to turn. She felt his presence, a steady warmth against the encroaching cold. "Clara." Julian's voice was low, laced with a concern that made her want to shatter. "I saw you leave. I saw Sterling follow you." "What did he say?" She wrapped her arms around herself, a futile attempt to hold her fracturing world together. "It doesn't matter." "The hell it doesn't," he said, stepping beside her, his gaze sweeping her face, reading the terror in her eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost." A bitter, broken laugh escaped her lips. "I have. I've been living with one for years." She had to push him away, for his own good. If he knew the truth, he would tear Walter apart, and Walter would unleash his poison, and her father's name would be dragged through a fabricated mire of lies. She would be the one who led the ghouls to his grave. "Julian, you should go back inside," she said, her voice hollow. "This is my problem. I can't be your failsafe anymore. I think it's best if I resign. Tomorrow." He stared at her, his expression hardening, not with anger, but with a sudden, piercing understanding. He had seen this before. He had seen people break under the weight of his family's world. But this was different. This wasn't a retreat. It was a surrender. "No," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. He reached out, not to touch her, but to block her path as she tried to move past him. "I hired you because you deal in truth, so deal it to me now. Whatever that bastard said to you, whatever leverage he has, we fight it together." That was the deal. "You don't understand," she whispered, tears finally blurring the city lights into a fractured kaleidoscope. "The price of the truth is too high." "Let me be the judge of that," he insisted, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, locking onto hers. "Clara, who are you?" The question hung between them, the one he had asked that first night, the one she had never truly answered. The lie was a heavy cloak, and she was so tired of wearing it. In that moment, looking into the eyes of the one man who had seen her, truly seen her for who she was, the weight became unbearable. "My name," she said, the words tasting like rust and absolution, "is Clara Evans. My father was Daniel Evans. He was the lead architect on Project Cerberus, the downtown Croft Tower, the man your company and Walter Sterling destroyed." The air crackled. She watched Julian process the information, the puzzle pieces of her obsession with the archives, her knowledge of structural engineering, her very name, clicking into place in his mind. She saw not anger, but a wave of something far more devastating. Comprehension. The shadow of his father's sins had finally stretched long enough to touch him directly. "He knows," she continued, the confession now a torrent. "Walter knows who I am. He has a file, fabricated evidence, lies about my father, gambling debts, mental instability, everything he needs to posthumously crucify him in the press. He said if I expose him, he'll release it. He'll turn my father's memory to ash. He wants me to walk away, to take your money and let the lies stay buried." Julian was silent for a long time, his jaw a hard line of granite. He looked away from her, toward the distant silhouette of the very tower that had started it all. He was the architect, a man who saw the world in terms of structures and foundations, and he understood, with sickening clarity, that the foundation of his entire life, of Croft Enterprises itself, was built on the rubble of her family. When he finally turned back to her, the cool, analytical CEO was gone. In his place was a man radiating a fury so cold it was incandescent. "He made 2 mistakes," Julian said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "The first was thinking he could threaten you. The second was thinking he could use my father's methods against me." He took a step closer, his presence a shield against the darkness. "He thinks he's checkmated you. He's wrong. He's checkmated himself. We are not going to let him bury the truth, Clara. We are going to excavate it, bring it into the light, and build something new on top of it. But we will do it on our terms. Not in a ballroom full of vultures, in a boardroom where power is actually wielded." He held out his hand. "Your resignation is not accepted. I'm promoting you. Effective immediately, you are the lead on the internal investigation into Walter Sterling, and your first official act will be to help me utterly and completely ruin him." Clara looked at his outstretched hand, then into his eyes. She saw no pity, only partnership. He wasn't saving her. He was arming her. The despair that had gripped her began to recede, replaced by a fragile, terrifying hope. She placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, a silent promise. The war had not just started. It had been raging for 20 years, but for the first time, she was no longer fighting it alone. The following Monday morning, the main boardroom on the penthouse floor of Croft Tower felt like a tomb. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the soft clink of a sterling silver water pitcher against crystal glasses, poured by a nervous attendant who vanished as quickly as he appeared. The entire board was present, a collection of old-world power brokers in charcoal suits, men who had known Julian since he was a boy, in a blazer too big for his shoulders. They sat around the vast, polished mahogany table, their faces a mixture of confusion and irritation at the emergency summons. At the head of the table, Walter Sterling sat to Julian's right, the position of honor he had occupied for decades. He looked relaxed, exuding his usual grandfatherly calm, even giving Clara a small, condescending smile as she entered and took a seat against the wall, behind Julian, a notepad in her lap. He believed he had won. He saw her presence as a sign of her capitulation. Julian stood. He was the picture of control, his suit immaculate, his face an unreadable mask. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice calm and even, carrying to every corner of the room. "I've called this meeting to discuss the future of Croft Enterprises. For 40 years, this company was built in the image of one man, my father. It was built on aggression, on intimidation, and on an unwavering belief that the ends always justify the means. It was successful, it was powerful, and it was, in some ways, corrupt." A murmur went through the room. Walter shifted in his seat, his smile tightening. "I have tried to steer us in a new direction," Julian continued, "one based on transparency and integrity. It has come to my attention that some vestiges of the old way of doing things remain, a rot deep in our foundation that must be carved out if we are to survive." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, his eyes, cold as ice, moved to the man beside him. "Walter, how are your personal finances?" The question was so direct, so utterly unexpected, that Walter blinked. I beg your pardon, Julian. I hardly think this is the appropriate forum." "Oh, I think it is," Julian said, his voice dropping. He pressed a button on the console in front of him. The large screen on the wall, usually reserved for quarterly projections, flickered to life. It showed a complex web of offshore accounts, shell corporations and wire transfers, a 20-year history of meticulous, systematic embezzlement. For 2 decades, Walter, you have been siphoning funds from this company, Julian stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Small amounts at first, rounding errors, then more. Payments to ghost suppliers, inflated invoices, a quiet, patient theft that has amounted to over $93 million. We have the digital trail, we have the bank records, we have you. Walter's face had gone from ruddy to a deathly pale. The board members stared, stunned into silence. This is a misunderstanding, Walter stammered, trying to regain his composure. An accounting error. Ms. Evans, no doubt, in her enthusiasm, has misinterpreted the data. Ms. Evans, Julian said, without looking at her, is the most competent analyst I have ever employed. Her findings are flawless. But your embezzlement, as it turns out, is your second worst crime. Julian clicked the button again. The screen changed. It now showed a single scanned document. A change order for substandard steel on Project Cerberus, bearing the forged signature of Daniel Evans. Beside it, an invoice from a nearly bankrupt company, Sterling Metals. Project Cerberus, Julian announced to the silent room. The downtown tower, a project that cemented my father's legacy, but was plagued by a near-catastrophic structural failure years later, costing this company hundreds of millions in retrofitting. The official blame was placed on the lead architect, Daniel Evans, for faulty design and materials. He was ruined. He turned his body fully toward Walter, his voice now a low, menacing whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. But the architect wasn't at fault. You were. You supplied cheap, substandard steel from your own failing company to save yourself from bankruptcy. You forged his signature. You falsified inspection reports. You buried your crime under an innocent man's reputation. Walter shot to his feet, his chair scraping back. This is slander. You have no proof. We have everything, Clara said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a scalpel. She stood and walked to the table, placing a thick, bound folio in front of Julian. The original shipping manifests that contradict the inspection dates, the chemical analysis from the retrofitting that proves the steel's composition was below code, and a sworn affidavit from the night foreman you bribed 20 years ago, who has decided his conscience is finally worth more than your hush money. Walter stared at her, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He knew he was beaten on the facts. He reached for his final weapon. "You're a fool, Julian," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you can expose me without consequence? I have a file on Daniel Evans, a legacy of his own. I will leak it. The world won't see him as a victim. They'll see him as a degenerate gambler, a mentally unstable fraud. You'll clear his name, and I'll desecrate his memory." "Is that what you want, girl?" He sneered at Clara. "To win the battle and have me salt the earth of your father's grave?" This was the moment, the final, desperate move of a cornered snake. Julian didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "That, Walter, was your final mistake. You see, I knew you would do that. I anticipated it. Because that is what my father would have done. And you, more than anyone, are a creature of his world." He gestured to the head of security, who had been standing silently by the door. "Last night, I took the liberty of meeting with the editors of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I gave them the entire story, all of it, the embezzlement, the fraud, your forged documents, and your disgusting plan to defame a dead man to cover your tracks." He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. The story isn't going to be Croft CFO accused of fraud. The story, Walter, is going to be venerable executive threatens to smear dead architect to hide decades of crime. You won't be a fallen titan. You will be a ghoul. You thought you could hold his legacy hostage. Instead, you have guaranteed his sainthood. The world will know Daniel Evans was a hero, a man of integrity who was destroyed by your greed. Your last-ditch effort to ruin him will, in fact, immortalize him. The color drained completely from Walter's face. It was the look of a chess master who has not only been beaten, but has had the entire board flipped over on his head. He had been outmaneuvered, his every despicable move anticipated and turned against him. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He sank back into his chair, a deflated, hollowed-out old man. "Security will escort you from the building," Julian said, his voice flat. "Your assets have been frozen, pending litigation. The SEC and the District Attorney's office are waiting for you downstairs. You are a stain on this company's history, Walter. And today, we are cleaning house." As the guards took Walter's arms and led him, unresisting, from the room, Julian finally looked at Clara. In his eyes, she saw the immense cost of the victory. He had not just excised a traitor. He had been forced to confront the darkest parts of his own father's legacy, the rot that he had inherited. The party was over. The cleanup had just begun. In the months that followed, Croft Enterprises underwent a seismic shift. Julian's purge was swift and merciless. The board members loyal to Walter were forced out, replaced by a younger, more diverse group who believed in Julian's vision of transparency. He initiated a company-wide forensic audit, uncovering and correcting dozens of smaller injustices, old wounds left to fester from his father's reign. He didn't just change the personnel, he began to change the company's soul. The story of Clara and Daniel Evans became a legend, a modern parable of corporate justice. Her father was posthumously honored by the American Institute of Architects. His name was cleared, his genius celebrated. The ghost that had haunted Clara for so long was finally, peacefully, at rest. Clara herself became a quiet force within the company. Julian had given her a new title, Head of Strategic Oversight. It was a department of one. Her office remained next to his, and her job was simple: to be the conscience of the company, to question everything, to find the flaws in the blueprint before they became cracks in the foundation. She moved her mother into the finest care facility, a sun-drenched place with gardens and attentive nurses. She found a small, bright apartment in the city, a place that for the first time felt like her own, not a temporary shelter. She and Julian maintained a professional, if deeply bonded, relationship. The long nights of work continued, but the frantic energy was replaced by a steady, collaborative rhythm. They were partners in the truest sense, rebuilding an empire on a new foundation. Yet, an invisible wall remained between them. The ghosts of their pasts, though quieted, still stood in the space they left for something more. One crisp autumn evening, months after Walter's downfall, Julian found her standing by the panoramic window in his office, looking down at the city. "I have something for you," he said. He handed her not a file, but a single, heavy key and a deed. She looked at him, confused. "What is this?" "The Finch property," he said. "The $10 billion hole in the ground. I finally closed the deal last week, for a fraction of the price, after Finch's assets were seized in the fraud investigation. You bought it, but you can't build on it." "I can't," he corrected her. "But we can." He unrolled a set of blueprints on his desk. They showed not a skyscraper, but a revolutionary design for a public space, a terraced park, a performing arts center, and at its heart, a soaring, light-filled building. "The Daniel Evans Center for Architectural Integrity," Julian said softly. "A non-profit foundation and school dedicated to ethical design. A place that will teach future generations that the strength of a structure isn't just in its steel, but in the honesty of its creator. It's a paradox, just like you said. You can't build up, and you can't build down. So we'll build out. We'll honor the easements. We'll respect the geology. We'll build something that gives back to the city, instead of just taking from it." Clara stared at the blueprints, her vision blurring. It was more than an apology, more than a tribute. It was a promise. It was the physical manifestation of everything they had fought for. "My father. He would have loved it," she whispered, tracing the elegant lines with her finger. "I want you to run it, Clara," he said. "Be the chairperson. This is your legacy as much as it is his." She looked up at him then, and the last of the invisible walls between them finally dissolved. She saw not the CEO, not the inheritor of a tainted dynasty, but Julian, a man who had faced the ugliness of his own history and had chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins. "I can't," she said softly. His face fell. "Why not?" "Because my place is here," she said, her voice steady and sure. "With you. Rebuilding this." She gestured around them, at the company, at the city, at the future stretching out before them. "The Daniel Evans Center will be his legacy. Croft Enterprises. That has to be ours." He stepped closer, the space between them now charged with a new, unspoken understanding. The ghosts were gone. The debts were paid. All that remained was them. Two survivors standing on a foundation they had painstakingly, painfully built together. A foundation of truth. "Clara," he said, his voice husky, his name a question, a plea, and a promise all in one. "Julian," she replied, her own voice full of a light she hadn't felt in years. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It wasn't the end of a fairy tale. It was the beginning of a blueprint, one they would design together, line by painstaking line. Outside, the city glittered, a canvas waiting for a new story to be built upon it. And for the first time, it felt less like a battleground and more like home.